Some movies unsettle you with violence. Others unsettle you with silence. The Hand belongs to the rare category that does both and does it in a way that leaves you questioning not just the characters, but the people who made the film. On the surface, it appears to be a story about a dismembered hand with a mind of its own. Beneath that surface lies something far more disorienting, a production defined by tension, strange coincidences, and the kind of behind-the-scenes unease that clings to a film long after the cameras stop rolling. In 1981, Oliver Stone was still shaping his identity as a filmmaker, and this project became an outlet for creative impulses he wasn't yet able or willing to explain. His adaptation of the original novel wasn't simply a translation from page to screen. It was a confrontation with themes he carried from his own past. The result was a set where emotions cracked easily, where performances felt rawer than intended, and where the line between artistic choice and personal confession blurred constantly. Michael Caine, taking on the lead role during a turbulent period in his career, found himself drawn into a process that felt unpredictable at best and psychologically draining at worst. Strange technical failures, inexplicable prop shifts, and fractures in the film's atmosphere weren't isolated events. They became part of the rhythm of production, shaping the movie as much as Stone's script did. Over 4 decades later, The Hand remains one of those films people don't just watch. They revisit, searching for the details no one ever properly explained. Because behind the story of a severed limb lies a far stranger truth: the real mysteries never made it onto the screen. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The Hand 1981. Fact 1. The unspoken memory that inspired the film. Long before The Hand became a screenplay, Oliver Stone carried with him a memory he rarely named directly, a moment from his younger years involving a violent argument, a sudden injury, and a silence afterward that felt heavier than the event itself. He never described the details clearly, but crew members who worked closely with him said the memory surfaced whenever the film's themes of loss and anger crept into conversations. To them, it was obvious that Stone wasn't simply adapting Mark Brandel's novel. He was excavating something emotional he had buried long before he stepped behind the camera. This private origin shaped the way Stone approached the script. Pages shifted constantly. Scenes appeared with tones that felt more personal than narrative-driven. Characters expressed feelings that seemed less like fiction and more like echoes of Stone's unresolved thoughts. Even Michael Caine, who had seen hundreds of scripts throughout his career, noticed the instability. He once remarked that Stone wrote like someone trying to catch a shadow before it disappears. The rewriting never stopped. Sometimes entire emotional beats changed minutes before filming. Other times, Stone removed lines that seemed too revealing only to replace them with something even more ambiguous. The process created a film steeped in discomfort, not because of supernatural horror, but because the story felt like an expression of something Stone could not articulate outright. And that is why The Hand carries its strange, fractured energy. It wasn't crafted to frighten audiences with gore or spectacle. It was built from an emotional fissure its director never fully explained. A wound remembered not through clarity, but through the lingering shape it left behind. Fact 2. Michael Caine stepped in without realizing the cost. Michael Caine agreed to star in The Hand during a period when he needed work that would keep him in motion professionally, financially, and personally. On first read, the script felt unusual but manageable, a strange thriller with psychological undertones. He didn't sense the intensity waiting beneath the surface. What he walked into was a production where emotional boundaries blurred, quickly guided by a director who demanded vulnerability at a level Caine hadn't expected. Stone directed Caine with a force that bordered on confrontational. He pushed for rawness, for hesitation, for flashes of anger that felt almost invasive. Caine later admitted that some scenes left him unsure whether he was portraying a character or exposing pieces of himself he preferred to keep hidden. Retakes weren't about adjusting performance. They were about wearing down the instinct to remain controlled. Crew members noticed the toll early. Caine's usually composed demeanor shifted into exhaustion by the midpoint of filming. He grew quieter between takes, focused, almost guarded. His performance, while praised for its intensity, was forged under circumstances he seldom spoke about afterward. In interviews, years later, Caine brushed off questions about the film as though discussing something he preferred not to revisit. Not because he disliked the work, but because the emotional weight of the shoot remained tied to experiences he didn't fully want to unpack. Some roles stay with actors because they're unforgettable. This one stayed because it pressed too close to something internal. Fact 3, malfunctions that followed no technical pattern. From the first week of production, crew members began noticing technical problems that defied explanation. Cameras, freshly serviced and tested, jammed without warning, often during moments of high emotional intensity. Lights flickered inconsistently, refusing to hold steady even after electricians checked every connection. Sound equipment picked up faint ticks and taps that seemed to mimic fingertips brushing metal surfaces, but no source could be found. The center of these issues was almost always the hero hand prop. Pneumatic valves misfired. Rigs stalled mid-motion. In one incident, the mechanical hand snapped forward unexpectedly, startling the operator, who insisted he had not touched the controls. When the effects team examined the machinery afterward, they found nothing wrong. No broken seals, no pressure spikes, no faulty wiring. The most unsettling moment came during a car window stunt. The hand was supposed to hit the glass with controlled force. Instead, the impact shattered the window in an explosive burst no engineer could replicate later. The rig behaved unpredictably only in that exact moment, as though responding to something neither mechanical nor scripted. No single malfunction was unexplainable on its own, but the pattern, the consistency of failures linked to the same prop, the same scenes, the same emotional beats, created unease that many crew members carried throughout the shoot. In the end, it wasn't the accidents themselves that unnerved the team, but the feeling that the equipment wasn't failing randomly. It was reacting. Fact 4, the moment Stone treated like a private ritual. Among all the scenes shot for the hand, there was one quiet moment Oliver Stone guarded with unusual protectiveness. It wasn't a violent sequence or a complicated stunt. It was a simple shot of the severed hand resting in darkness, its outline barely shaped by a dim shaft of light. Stone ordered almost everyone off the set, keeping only a single camera operator and insisting on absolute silence. Crew members waiting outside noticed he repeated the shot, obsessively filming nearly identical takes with a concentration that bordered on fixation. When the footage reached the editing room, the scene looked deceptively plain, a still hand resting in a corner. But the editor noticed something strange. The shadows shifted subtly from take to take, even though the lighting setup never changed. The background deepened in color. The angle appeared to drift a fraction of a degree. Nothing was technically wrong yet. Something felt undeniably off, like the frame was slowly absorbing the room around it. Stone refused to clarify his reasoning. When asked why the shot mattered so much, he simply said, "That's where everything turns." His answer only confused the crew further. Some believed he saw the hand as a metaphor for an unresolved part of himself. Others thought Stone had created his own superstitious ritual to summon the tone he wanted. What remains on screen is quiet, almost still, but not truly still. It's the kind of image that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for you to notice what shouldn't be there, even if you never truly do. Fact 5, the effects team forced to build what didn't exist yet. The special effects department faced a challenge that bordered on impossible, creating a severed hand that appeared autonomous long before modern animatronics existed. The tools of the early 1980s offered only crude mechanics, stiff joints, and unreliable pneumatic rigs, none capable of producing the lifelike motion Stone insisted upon. So, the team began constructing hybrid devices from whatever materials they could repurpose: surgical tubing, custom-milled hinges, hidden pulleys embedded in furniture, even fishing lines threaded invisibly through wardrobe pieces. Their early attempts collapsed spectacularly. One prototype bent inward as though imploding. Another flicked its fingers uncontrollably, producing movements so erratic that crew members stepped back instinctively. But Stone didn't want perfection. He wanted something unsettling, a motion that felt halfway between mechanical intention and organic impulse. The chaos of their failures ultimately inspired the solution. Instead of smoothing the movements, the effects team embraced unpredictability. They engineered subtle spasms, uneven crawls, and tiny jerks that evoked a disturbing sense of autonomy. When test audiences viewed early cuts, many whispered the same suspicion: the filmmakers must have used a real hand in certain shots. Rumors spread about a hyper-realistic mold cast from an actual donor. The studio denied every claim, but the consistency of the rumor and the team's guarded silence suggested a truth no one wanted to confirm. In the end, their greatest achievement wasn't technical brilliance. It was creating a prop that felt less like a machine and more like something that refused to be controlled. Fact 6. The accident that rearranged the film's fate. Midway through production, an unexpected accident rewired the film's direction entirely. A stunt involving collapsing debris was meticulously planned, tested repeatedly, and deemed safe. But on the day of shooting, the structure fell seconds ahead of schedule. The stunt performer managed to escape unharmed, yet the camera captured something no one anticipated: the hand prop sliding through the falling debris with a motion the rig wasn't designed to produce. When Stone reviewed the footage, he didn't see a malfunction. He saw opportunity. He played the clip over and over, transfixed by the raw, chaotic movement, unpolished, uneven, almost instinctive. To him, it was more expressive than anything the team had engineered. It suggested intent rather than choreography. Inspired, Stone rewrote the final act, abandoning his original ending in favor of a version that leaned into the physicality of the hand. What should have been a human, psychological unraveling became a more aggressive, tangible confrontation. The studio later questioned the tonal shift, but Stone defended it as the film revealing itself. Crew members who witnessed the accident disagreed. They felt the footage carried a strange energy, something born not from design, but from disorder. And even after multiple attempts, no one could replicate the exact motion captured in that moment. In the finished film, a trace of that accidental movement remains, a flicker of realism too imperfect to fabricate. It's a reminder that a single unintended instant can bend an entire story into a new shape. Fact 7. The technician who left without looking back. During a late-night shoot, shrouded in fog and exhaustion, one of the most experienced technicians assigned to monitor the mechanical hand experienced something that unsettled him to his core. His job was simple: ensure the hand's movements matched the cues from the operator controlling the pneumatic system. But that night, the prop didn't wait for commands. He noticed a slight twitch before the signal was given, a tremor that seemed more like anticipation than malfunction. Moments later, while resetting the scene, the hand jerked toward him abruptly, its fingers curling in a motion that wasn't part of any programmed routine. The technician froze. Others nearby assumed he had bumped the rig or misread the timing, but he shook his head, pale, insisting the prop had moved on its own. His voice carried a quiet conviction that made the set fall strangely silent. Without another word, he removed his tool belt, set it gently on a nearby crate, and walked off into the darkness beyond the lighting rigs. He didn't ask to be replaced. He didn't sign out. He simply vanished from the production, ignoring calls and messages afterward. No one ever extracted a clearer explanation. He refused to talk about the film again. Those who witnessed the event later admitted it altered the atmosphere of the entire shoot. It wasn't the malfunction that frightened them. It was the technician's reaction, the certainty in his eyes when he said the hand had acted first. Fact 8, the draft that showed a much darker film. Before the studio reined in Stone's ambitions, the hand briefly existed in a far stranger form, a draft accessible only to a handful of assistants and executives. This early version was less a traditional thriller and more a psychological descent rendered in surreal fragments. Instead of linear storytelling, it unfolded like a nightmare, broken reflections, looping scenes, and hallucinations that appeared to bleed into reality. Executives reading the draft grew uneasy, not because of the violence, but because of the intimacy. The script revealed too much not about the characters, but about Stone himself. One executive described it as a man writing from the inside of his own fractured mind. The studio demanded revisions, fearing audiences would be alienated by a film that refused narrative stability. Years later, descriptions of the lost draft resurfaced through scattered recollections. Some mentioned a sequence where the protagonist sees his own hand tapping on a table while he remains frozen in place. Another described the hand suspended in a mirror, moving even when the protagonist stands perfectly still. Stone's original plan seemed to treat the hand less as a physical object and more as a symbolic parasite feeding on guilt and unresolved pain. Although the final film abandoned these extreme elements, the ghost of that draft lives on. The abrupt tonal shifts, the uneasy quiet moments, and the fractured pacing all hint at a version of the story that was too raw to survive production. Fact 9, the score that unsettled the crew before anyone else heard it. James Horner approached the music for the hand with a philosophy that unnerved even the sound team. He wanted the score to feel like something creeping under the listener's skin. Instead of relying on traditional horror motifs, he layered high-frequency tones with metallic textures that whispered beneath the orchestration. The result wasn't just heard, it was felt vibrating faintly through equipment floors and occasionally the walls of the studio. During early mixing sessions, sound engineers complained of headaches, pressure behind the eyes, and a faint sense of dizziness. One technician swore the music produced a tingling sensation in his fingertips, a detail Horner found amusing rather than concerning. Stone, impressed by the discomfort, encouraged Horner to push the design even further. But the studio became alarmed when test viewers reacted, physically shifting uncomfortably in their seats, gripping armrests or glancing over their shoulders at moments where nothing visually threatening occurred. The score had created its own atmosphere of dread, independent of the film's imagery. Some of the most unsettling elements were softened for release, but fragments remain hidden in the final mix. Careful listeners hear faint scraping beneath the violins, a rhythmic texture resembling nails on metal. No documentation explains how those layers were produced, and Horner never revealed the exact methods behind them. For many who worked on the film, the music didn't just accompany the horror, it predicted it. Fact 10, the night a crew member walked off without explanation. One of the most unsettling incidents on the hand occurred during a fog-heavy night shoot when exhaustion blurred the edges of everyone's awareness. A technician responsible for assisting the effects team began noticing inconsistencies in the hand prop's behavior. He saw it tilt slightly when no controls were activated, fingers shifting as if responding to someone calling its attention. He chalked it up to fatigue until the moment it jerked sharply during a reset, a movement that no one, including the operator, had initiated. Witnesses described the technician going silent, staring at the prop with an expression that bordered on disbelief. When approached, he muttered something about timing that wasn't coming from us, then stepped back as though the hand were alive. He removed his headset, set it neatly beside the equipment cart, and walked toward the edge of the set. He didn't look back. Moments later, he was gone. Attempts to contact him afterward led nowhere. He never returned to collect his final payment, and he refused to answer calls from production. Some speculated he suffered a stress-induced breakdown, but those who saw his face insisted it wasn't fear of failing equipment, it was fear of something he believed had acted with intention. The most disturbing part, the rig worked flawlessly the following morning, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Fact 11. The human performer who questioned his own movements. Mechanical rigs could create force, but they couldn't replicate nuance. To achieve the most unsettling motions, the ones that felt instinctive twitch, like unnervingly human, the production hired a mime whose mastery of isolating hand muscles made him uniquely capable of breathing life into the severed limb. His job required him to contort himself behind walls, beneath furniture, and inside cramped set pieces where only his hand was visible. The resulting movements were disturbingly lifelike. Crew members reviewing playback often forgot the hand belonged to a living performer. The mime's finger isolations created a crawling motion so precise that even those operating the mechanical rigs admitted they couldn't replicate it. But the physical toll mounted quickly. Hours of tension left the performer with numb joints and trembling muscles. During one particularly grueling shoot, Stone noticed the hand on camera moving more frantically than rehearsed, as if reacting to something off-screen. He praised the spontaneity, calling it pure instinct. The mime, however, was unsettled. He insisted he hadn't performed the movements that way and couldn't recall altering the choreography. He described a strange haze, a moment where he felt disconnected from his own hand, as though it moved ahead of him, not with him. After filming Wrapped, he changed career paths, entirely stepping away from contortion work. When asked why in later interviews, he paused before saying, "Sometimes your body learns to move in ways you never meant it to, and that's when you stop trusting it." The final film contains several shots born from those uncanny motions, each carrying the echo of a performer unsure whether he was fully in control. Fact 12. The deleted sequence that made the studio uneasy. During editing, Stone assembled a mid-film sequence designed to steep viewers in the protagonist's unraveling mind. It opened quietly, the character walking through his dimly lit home, following a faint series of whispers disguised as scratches. The tension grew slowly, deliberately, as he moved from room to room, the kind of creeping dread that feels like it originates inside the viewer rather than on the screen. But the climax of the sequence unnerved early viewers in a way no one expected. The final shot featured the hand sitting perfectly still on a high shelf. What chilled test watchers wasn't the hand, it was the shadow behind it. The shape shifted in ways that didn't match the lighting, bending forward almost imperceptibly, as if leaning in to murmur instructions. Some claimed the figure resembled a crouched silhouette. Others described it as a smudge that moved. The studio didn't appreciate the ambiguity. They feared audiences would interpret the moment as supernatural, creating expectations the rest of the film didn't fulfill. On paper, they argued for tonal consistency. Privately, several executives admitted the image left them unsettled in a way they couldn't logically explain. Stone fought to keep the scene, but ultimately relented. The footage was removed, the negative shelved, and according to some editors, later destroyed. Only a handful of people ever saw the full sequence again, all of whom described it with the same uneasy tone, not because it was violent or grotesque, but because it suggested something watching the story unfold from inside the frame. A presence the film never spoke of again. Fact 13. The invisible perspective Stone insisted was always there. Oliver Stone had a habit during production that confused nearly everyone. He wanted the camera to behave as if a silent witness existed just outside the narrative. He never named this observer, never explained its purpose, and never linked it to the script. Yet he repeatedly instructed the cinematographer to leave empty corners in the frame, to hold shots longer than necessary, or to tilt the camera slightly, as though acknowledging a presence the characters couldn't see. Actors found the direction disorienting. When Michael Caine asked what this unseen viewpoint represented, Stone responded with a cryptic line. It's what he refuses to face. The ambiguity made the set feel unsettled. Shots that should have felt straightforward suddenly vibrated with tension, as if the film itself were aware of something lurking beyond the visible space. Some crew members dismissed it as a stylistic experiment. Others felt the idea seep into the atmosphere. A lighting assistant confessed that during late shoots, he avoided standing alone near the back of the set because it felt like occupying a place meant for someone or something else. Even the camera operators later admitted that certain angled shots gave them the sensation of aiming into a void that wasn't truly empty. When asked years later, Stone denied the presence had any concrete identity. But those who worked under his direction insisted that the concept shaped the film's visual language more profoundly than any of the written scenes. Once you become aware of it, the movie's lingering glances and slow pans no longer feel accidental. They feel like acknowledgments of something watching from the other side of the screen. Fact 14. The prop that never stayed where it belonged. The hero hand used for close-up shots was sculpted with painstaking detail, textured skin, hairline, creases, veins that caught the light at unsettling angles. But the most disturbing thing about it wasn't its realism. It was the way it refused to remain in the position the crew left it. The shifts were subtle, a fingertip angled differently, the palm slightly rotated the wrist, leaning toward the edge of a table. Enough to notice, not enough to justify with reason. Prop masters attempted to eliminate every possibility. They checked for vibration, airflow, ambient heat. They marked the hand's placement with tape. They even placed sandbags around tables to avoid micro shifts. None of it stopped the changes. On more than one morning, the hand was found in a position that contradicted continuity photos taken the night before. One assistant, unnerved by the discrepancies, began taking secret Polaroids at the end of each shift. Reviewing them only deepened his concern. The photos showed tiny alterations, slight bends in fingers, new shadows that shouldn't have existed, the faint impression that the hand had rotated while no one was watching. When he mentioned it to Stone, the director simply smiled and requested that specific prop for the next intense scene. After the production ended, that same prop vanished from storage. No one checked it out, and no paperwork existed to explain the disappearance. To this day, its whereabouts remain unknown. And among those who handled it closely, few were surprised. They had long suspected it wouldn't stay still forever. Fact 15. The power failure that left everyone frozen. Near the final weeks of production, an incident occurred that crew members still recount in lowered voices. During an interior shoot, just as Stone gave the call to begin, the entire set plunged into instant darkness. Every light, monitor, and piece of recording equipment went dead simultaneously. Even the generators, reliable industrial machines designed to withstand heavy load, ceased without warning. For several seconds, no one moved. The darkness felt thick, pressing against the walls as though the air itself were closing in. Some crew members reported hearing faint tapping sounds, irregular and soft, as if fingers brushed gently across wooden surfaces. A grip swore he felt something pass near his leg. Another insisted he heard breathing just behind his shoulder. Whether these sensations were real or born from panic, no two accounts matched except for their fear. When emergency lights flickered back on the set, remained perfectly intact. Nothing had blown. Nothing had overloaded. Electricians inspected the systems and found no faults, No tripped circuits, no reason for the failure. It was as if the electricity had simply decided to stop. Stone, instead of being alarmed, seemed strangely invigorated. He told the cast to use the atmosphere in their next take, claiming the moment had given the film what it needed. The crew didn't share his enthusiasm. Many quietly believed the blackout hadn't been caused by equipment at all, because for those few minutes it felt like the darkness had belonged to something other than the room. Fact 16, the frame that appeared from nowhere. During the long and tedious nights of editing, one of the assistant editors paused on a transitional splice and noticed something that shouldn't have existed, a single frame containing an image no one remembered filming. It flashed by too quickly to register in real time, but when slowed down, it revealed a distorted reflection, the vague suggestion of an eye gleaming on a metallic surface. No scene in the film used such imagery. No camera setup matched the angle. No continuity notes referenced it. Assuming it was a leftover from an unlogged take, the editor searched through every reel scanning for a matching shot. Nothing surfaced. The frame was unique, an orphaned image, adrift in the middle of two unrelated sequences. When Stone was shown the anomaly, he stared at it for an uncomfortably long time before remarking, "Sometimes the film catches more than we intend." The line rattled the editor. Out of caution, he removed the frame and replaced the splice. But years later, during a restoration process, another stray frame was discovered, this time containing what looked like a twisted mouth shape lingering in a section of the reel where no such visual belonged. The restoration team couldn't explain the artifact. It didn't resemble chemical damage or double exposure. Some editors who revisited the footage suggested the anomalies felt less like accidents and more like intrusions, as if something had pressed briefly against the film stock, leaving an imprint before dissolving. Whether glitch coincidence or something stranger, the phantom frames became part of the film's behind-the-scenes mythology. And once you've seen them, it's impossible not to wonder what else might have slipped in unnoticed. Fact 17, the ending Stone wanted but never dared to film. Before accidents and studio pressure reshaped the story, Stone had envisioned an ending far more abstract and far more disturbing than what appeared in the final cut. His earliest notes described the protagonist losing track not only of reality, but of the pieces of himself that defined it. Stone imagined reflections that moved independently, shadows that recoiled from the character's body, and glimpses of limbs twitching in corners where none should be. This wasn't body horror in the traditional sense. It was symbolic fragmentation, a visual representation of guilt and identity breaking into pieces. According to storyboards later uncovered by a crew member, the climax would have featured the protagonist confronting fractured versions of himself, each embodying an emotion he refused to acknowledge, rage curled into a silhouette, fear reflected through an uncooperative mirror, shame lingering as a hand tapping restlessly on a tabletop. The studio hated the idea. It was too psychological, too surreal, too expensive, and far too ambiguous for what they believed audiences wanted. They pushed Stone toward a more concrete resolution, something grounded in physical action rather than emotional disintegration. Reluctantly, he obliged, but traces of that abandoned ending remain embedded in the film. Slight delays in reflections, camera angles that hint at someone standing where no one should be, a few shadow movements that don't quite match the actor's motions. They are faint echoes of a conclusion Stone once imagined, a conclusion where the severed hand wasn't just a monster, but a fractured piece of the protagonist's own identity trying to crawl its way back to him. Fact 18, the first screening that left the room hollow. When the earliest full cut of the hand was shown to studio executives, the reaction was unsettling, not because of anger or disappointment, but because of the silence. As the final shot faded and the credits began, no one reached for notes or leaned forward to ask questions. The room felt drained, as if something heavy had settled over the audience. One executive reportedly stood up, walked out without a word, and only later murmured that the film felt too close to something we shouldn't have seen. It wasn't the violence that troubled them. It was the oppressive, emotional weight. The film radiated a kind of suffocating tension that made viewers feel like they had witnessed a private psychological collapse rather than a fictional narrative. Some executives argued the movie was too bleak for mainstream release. Others wondered aloud if Stone had unintentionally exposed more of himself than he realized. Inside the projection booth, the operator noticed something odd as well. During a reel change, he heard a faint series of taps, soft, deliberate, rhythmic, coming from the back wall. He assumed it was a loose container until the tapping stopped abruptly when he approached. When he checked the racks afterward, nothing was out of place. Official documentation of the screening describes it as unclear and emotionally heavy. But those who were present recalled a more haunting sensation that the film didn't merely unsettle them, it observed them. As if for a moment, the boundary between viewer and viewed had briefly shifted, and no one in that room was eager to talk about why. Fact 19, the actor who grew afraid of his own space. One supporting actor, known for his disciplined work ethic, experienced a series of incidents during production that left him deeply unsettled. To prepare for his scenes, he kept one of the primary hand props in his trailer, studying its texture and weight to make his reactions believable. But after a few days, he noticed the hand wasn't staying where he left it. At first, it was small shifts, a slight change in angle, a finger tilted differently. Easy to dismiss as memory lapse. But then the movements became harder to rationalize. One morning, he found the hand balanced on the corner of his script, its fingers resting on a page describing his character's confrontation with the hand. Another day, he discovered it near the small sink in his trailer, positioned as if ready to slip into the drain. When he questioned the props department, they denied touching it. Access records showed no one had entered his trailer during the times he was away. Disturbed, the actor wrapped the prop tightly in a towel and placed it inside a storage bin, sealing the lid. The next morning, he found it lying on the makeup chair, fingers extended as if reaching toward the mirror. That was the moment he stopped preparing with props entirely. Though he completed the film professionally, he later admitted he avoided projects involving prosthetics for years afterward. In interviews, when asked about the hand, he redirected the conversation quickly. Some experiences, he said, are easier left unspoken, especially when they make your own private space feel inhabited by something that shouldn't be there. Fact 20, the interpretation Stone let fans discover on their own. From the beginning, the studio insisted the hand should be marketed as a straightforward thriller, a descent into madness grounded in psychology. But Oliver Stone quietly encouraged a different reading, one he never fully endorsed publicly, but hinted at in interviews and commentary. When asked whether the hand was a hallucination or a real entity, he responded with answers that sounded like riddles. Maybe it's real. Maybe the madness is... Or sometimes the mind gives shape to things it isn't ready to face. Stone designed the film with deliberate contradictions. Some scenes clearly depict the hand acting independently. Others suggest the protagonist could have been present during moments attributed to the hand. Shadows behave inconsistently. Reflections linger a beat too long. The ambiguity wasn't accidental, it was built into the film's bones. Fans later developed theories proposing that the hand existed simultaneously as both metaphor and manifestation, a fractured piece of the protagonist's psyche clawing its way into physical form. Stone neither confirmed nor denied these interpretations. His silence helped feed the mythology surrounding the film. What fascinated viewers most was the notion that both interpretations could be true at once, that the hand was a monster born of guilt and grief, and also something external, a presence drawn into being by emotional collapse. The film never chooses a side, and Stone seemed content to let audiences argue indefinitely. In the end, the most enduring legacy of The Hand isn't the creature itself. It's the lingering uncertainty Stone left behind, the suspicion that the horror wasn't meant to be understood, only felt. Bonus fact: the prop that left without a trace. When the final day of shooting ended and the production began packing equipment for return, the props team realized something unsettling: the main hero, and the one used for the most intimate close-ups, the one the director relied on when he wanted the scene to feel charged, had vanished. At first, the crew assumed it had been misplaced. Props often shift locations during the chaotic final hours of filming, but once the inventory sheets were checked, the truth became harder to ignore. The hand wasn't in any of the cases, wasn't logged to any department, and hadn't been seen since its last use on set. Security footage offered no explanation. No one had entered the prop room after the final check. No containers had been moved. The hand simply no longer existed within the boundaries of the production. Stone suspected someone had stolen it, though even he admitted it was odd that a thief could remove the most recognizable prop without leaving a single trace. The studio dismissed the mystery, insisting it was an administrative oversight, but those who handled the hand regularly knew its disappearance was stranger than paperwork. One editor, who had spent hours reviewing footage that featured the hero prop, offered a peculiar thought: maybe it just went where it wanted to be. His comment was nervous humor, the kind used to mask discomfort, yet several crew members found the idea disturbingly plausible. Too many had seen the hand shift between takes. Too many had noticed subtle changes in its placement. Too many had felt a presence around it they couldn't fully describe. The strangest part wasn't that the hand disappeared. It was that no one ever found a reason to go looking for it. Because some mysteries linger more powerfully when left alone. Some films leave you with answers. Others leave you with echoes. The Hand belongs to the second kind of story that lingers, not because of what it shows, but because of everything it hints at and never resolves. Whether you believe the horror came from a broken mind, a restless prop, or something that slipped quietly between the edges of the frame, its mysteries continue to breathe decades later. Tell us in the comments which fact stayed with you the longest and whether you think the hand acted out of malfunction or intention. And if there's another film whose shadows deserve to be explored, let us know which title you want us to uncover next.